Hey, thanks for checking out some of our mental health resources for our series, Weeds. This has just been an honest look at mental health. And we've been honest in looking at some of the challenges that a lot of us go through at one time or another. This week is one of the most tender and challenging topics that we're addressing. And this is self-harm and suicide. Now, if you're in crisis, let me give you a number to call right away. That's 988 is the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. A phone call to connect you with a trained person who can help, that's a good thing. We want you to know, though, that you're not alone. And so those needing help, please know that suicide is not the answer that you think it is. Those who've lost a loved one to suicide, please know it's not your fault. For those of you wanting to help a friend or a loved one, thank you. I believe that we do have a sacred responsibility to share one another's burdens. I know we can't address everything in a 30-minute message, and so that's why we've created this resource page, to give additional help and hope. We have these focused interviews with a professional counselor each week. We have other resources available on this page as well. Thankful to have Chantelle Dockter here, and thank you for being willing to share with us.
Absolutely.
And what I'd like you to do is maybe just tell us a little bit about who you are and about your practice and any specialties you might have.
Yes. Well, I'm married and I have two teenage girls, senior Alexis and Kylie is a sophomore. So I am in the thick of getting ready for graduation, all the craziness that brings. And they are into sports, so they keep me busy. I'm a runner. That's how I deal with a lot of my stress.
Okay.
I've had a private practice for about 20 years now. And in private practice, you see a little bit of everybody, different kinds of people. I would say my specialties, I work with women's issues, teen girls, and then a lot of times I work with first responders. So that's a large part of my practice.
So what do you see right now coming out of COVID and coming with the mental health issues, and what are you kind of seeing in your practice?
Well, it's very, very busy. It never has slowed down since COVID. And I would say things have settled down just a little bit in terms of we're getting back to normal with being back in school and sports for the kids and work. But there's still a lot of anxiety and depression, I'm finding, as well as kind of this feeling of being behind. So whether it be social skills with kids and teens, or maybe scholastically not being adequately prepared. And I think that's creating a lot of stress for both kids and parents alike. And also just kind of a feeling of things are back open, but this kind of lethargic, not really wanting to be as involved. I've noticed that as well.
Is that some of that social anxiety that people...
I think it's some of the social anxiety and just getting out of the loop of it. And just, I find kids kind of want to be at home and be in their pajamas and like go to bed and be on their screens. And so I think it's just hard to get everybody back going again.
And when it comes to this week's topic, it's self-harm and suicide. Can you maybe share a little bit about what are some contributing factors to the rise that we see, or just in general?
I think teens and kids, teens is where you see a lot of the self-harm come out. Occasionally we'll see adults that do as well, but the teenage years is where you really see that come out. Mm-hmm. And I think our teens are under a lot of stress. So I think the things that we dealt with as kids, they're dealing with earlier and they're not as equipped to deal with. Plus just the craziness of our society, and then coming out of COVID, a lot of families are struggling. And so I think that kids are turning to that as a way to find relief or control, and because they don't have adequate other ways, like good coping strategies to deal with the stress that they're facing.
So if a person is dealing with self-harm and suicidal thoughts, where do they turn to help, or how can we help them?
Well, I think it's really important when there's self-harm involved or suicidal thoughts of any kind that a professional be brought in. I think that all adults who are involved with kids, whether it be teachers, coaches, pastors, youth pastors, we need to be a set of eyes that can see when kids are a little bit off, even parents of other kids. So we have a home where lots of kids like to come and go, and I'm always watching my own kids, but also just if I notice that one of the other kids is a little quieter than normal or struggling a little bit more, I think there's a way to kind of band together so that our kids don't fall through the cracks. Because in those situations where somebody is self-harming or considering suicide, a professional definitely needs to be involved. And so usually it will take a an adult of some kind to be able to talk with the child or the teen and bridge that gap to find them the help.
So if I'm a friend of somebody who's doing this, or if I'm a parent or a grandparent, how do I help them get to that professional help? Or what are some specific things that maybe we can do in that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really important to talk directly to the teenager or even adults, to talk directly about suicide and self-harm. I think sometimes there's that impression like, oh, if I bring it up, then it's going to plant an idea. It never will. That is something that it needs to be talked about directly. So if you are wondering about if somebody's hurting themselves or if they're considering suicide, ask about it, talk about it, bring it up. You'll find a lot of times that kids who are will say something. A lot of times they won't deny it. Sometimes they will, but a lot of times they're looking for an opportunity to be real and to get help. They just aren't going to pick up the phone and go call a counselor typically, although I've had that happen. But, and so I think the best way is to talk about it directly with them.
Okay. Oftentimes maybe there's some things that we do or are not helpful. So could you tell me some things that would not be helpful in that situation as a parent or as a grandparent?
Well, first of all, avoidance is not helpful. Being able to be, like I said, direct and provide a space where you're going to listen. I think that's the other thing is a lot of times as parents and adults, we tend to want to lecture or maybe fix it, give it, too much advice too fast, instead of sitting back and listening and figuring out, okay, why is the person feeling this way? Why are they gravitating towards this? I find that a lot of times with self-harm too. It's very confusing. It's confusing for parents and adults who see maybe their teenagers going through this. It's not as easy as, well, just stop doing that, because it can become very addictive. And sometimes parents even want to go to the place of punishing their kids for doing something like that. And really, it's an outward expression of something that needs to be dealt with that's internally problematic. So a lot of times self-harm and of course suicidal ideation go hand in hand with some mental health problems that are going on. And by that I mean anxiety, depression, there's other things as well as maybe some family problems, or there could be bullying going on at school, or just all this pressure that the person's putting on themselves to reach certain benchmarks that maybe they're not, so they're being hard on themselves. There can also be a family history of these mental health issues. So there's so many different factors, and I think we have to create a safe place for our kids and our teens to be able to feel like they can talk, So if you're going to ask them, you got to sit back and you got to be willing to hear whatever they have to say, even if it's not something you want to hear.
Right. And how do I not freak out?
Right. Well, I think that's our inclination oftentimes, is to freak out. And I think it's just a reminder of keep it together when you're with this person. And that if you create that safe, open place, that's the chance that you're going to get for them to talk. You as a parent or as an adult can talk about your own feelings and freak out on somebody else, whether it be your own help, whether you call a friend, because it's normal to have your own feelings of despair when your child's hurting, but a lot of times they'll put something out there and they'll kind of test you and they'll watch your face. I see my girls do this too, just with other stuff. Like they'll kind of throw something out and then I have to like just be super nonchalant about it and tell me more about that, even though maybe I'm freaking out inside. And when you show that you're willing to hear them, even if it's hard, they'll oftentimes give you more. And we can't be judgmental about where they're at. We have to say this is where they're at and meet them where they're at. That's always my goal in therapy, is to, whoever comes into my office for whatever reason, my goal is to meet them right where they're at, and then we can figure out how to get where we want to go.
Okay. So if I get my child or a grandchild or my friend into counseling, professional counseling, does that mean that I need to go to, or how's that work?
So it depends. A lot of times there will be some element of family counseling together. So if a teenager comes to see me, the first thing I like to do, I'll have the parent maybe come in for the first time and go over how it all works and maybe give their take as to what they're concerned about. But we really want to give that teenager a place that they can talk openly and honestly, because a lot of times they're not talking about the stuff that's inside, which is maybe part of the problem. Right. So creating just a place for them, and then it takes it takes a while to build that rapport with a stranger. So although teens tend to open up pretty quick if you're willing to listen, but to establish that relationship of trust and advocacy is good. And then oftentimes I will encourage teenagers to have their mom or their dad or both come in and talk about some of the hard things. But usually I try to have that place for them to connect first.
Well, two more questions. Number one on this would be, any other advice you would have for parents of teens or that are finding themselves in this kind of situation? Is there anything else that you think that parents should be aware of?
I would say stay very involved. I think teenagers have a way of kind of pushing aside. It's normal. They're getting more into their friends. They're caring more about what their friends are thinking than their parents, sometimes. But stay involved, even if they act that they don't want you there, or they act irritated when you come to give them a hug, or when you pop into their room because they're in there forever and you're trying to pull them out. I think sometimes as parents, our own feelings can get in the way. And so we're just like, well, they don't want us around. And so we're just going to let them be. But really, they need you more. They're just not able to say it. And a lot of times the mental health issues that go with cutting or suicidal ideation is something like depression, which causes isolation, causes you to pull away. When that happens, you're more likely to listen to those lies in your head of, nobody cares, nobody loves me, this world will be better off without me, those kind of things. And so I think when we then disengage, even though we think we're giving our teen what they want, I'm not saying don't give them space, because they do need that too, but continue to be a touch point.
Okay. And the last question would be, we're a church, we're a faith community, and we care. And so what advice would you have for a church? How can we be relevant in this field and relevant with people who are hurting and struggling, whether that's teens or adults?
I think doing more of this, honestly, David, because I think a lot of times, first of all, we need to be talking about mental health within the church. And that means sermons, and that means youth groups and other groups, like you said, for adults and for teens, because it's across the board. I think traditionally that hasn't always been the case. And when mental health struggles have been talked about, I think sometimes there's been kind of this, well, if you just pray more, or if you were walking right with the Lord, or those things. And I've had clients come in and there's just a lot of hurt that brings. And I think, again, meeting people where they're at and knowing that, hey, wherever you're at is okay. We can handle it as a church, and we're going to come around side you, and we're going to support you. So if somebody does share something that's difficult, whether it be in Bible study, youth group, having a team of people that can come along and check on them too, just check and be a touch point. Maybe get permission to, hey, would it be okay if I call and check on you, or if I send you a text just to check? I think is important too.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that. I know that sometimes we've had you come in and do some seminars for our teens and our parents on cutting or whatever. And so some of those seminars are resources is what we're trying to provide as well.
Absolutely. I think that it takes a village, in the sense of, I think when churches are working together with clinicians, providers, then I think we're going to do a much better job at tag teaming. And I think then it provides that safe place all across the board for people to be open, be real, and then develop ways to feel better.
Well, thank you so very much, Chantelle. I appreciate
welcome.
you, and appreciate your willingness to share and help.
Absolutely, anytime.